Greetings and welcome back to the Portraits in Fitness channel. My name is David, and this is my 15th update since embarking on the carnivore way of eating 105 days ago. I have experienced quite a transformation. It hasn't been entirely smooth sailing, but at this point, things are really kind of on autopilot, just humming along, and there's still many changes going on. Both physical and mental, really kind of settling into a state of mind and just really enjoying the experience. And I have no intention to change my diet except to make some tweaks, maybe somewhere along the line, to actually refine things a little bit. But things are going well, and today is really not about an update. What I thought I'd do today, since I'm on the road, staying in a hotel, and don't really have the time or the means for a full update, and you probably don't need a full update either. So what I wanted to do is just share an interview that I did with Dave Mack from the great No Carb Life channel to mark my 90-day carniversary. So early on in my journey of applying this lifestyle medicine, as I like to call it, I got in touch with Dave and said, I would love to do an interview with you on my 90-day carniversary, 90 days after embarking upon this way of eating, to have something to look forward to and have kind of a milestone to report on and look back on at some point as well. So the main difference between the video that follows and what's on Dave's channel, the original interview, is that I edited this version a little bit for brevity. It's still quite extensive and kind of gives you a full picture of my history with diet as a former vegetarian, also a fruitarian, so raw vegan in other words, and my athletic background and some of my journey living in another country. And without further ado, enjoy my interview on my 90-day carniversary with Dave Mack from No Carb Life. And until my next video update, as always, be good to yourself.
David, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, Dave, before getting into that, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. I'm a huge fan of you and your channel, and I've just learned so much from your guests, and it's almost kind of an addiction that I have, something I look forward to almost daily, looking forward to who's your next guest and what they're going to talk about. And I found common ground with a lot of your guests, but I don't like sitting around just on the couch listening to your interviews. So I like to find activity. So in a way, it's been motivating because I love listening, but I don't love listening while I'm stationary. So hopefully those that are listening to our conversation today will also find some healthy activities to do while they're listening. I want to start with my mindset, and I give a lot of credit to a friend of mine named Luis. He had a direct influence on me deciding to give the carnivore way of eating a try. So I want to give Luis a big shout out here, tons of credit to him. Luis and I are really like-minded, and in 2020, when all of the nonsense that begins with a C, we're not allowed to talk about that much here, which I refer to as the malarkey. So if you hear the malarkey, you know that that's code for the C word. And when that was starting, and before even the so-called lockdowns or house arrest began, Luis and I were in frequent contact, going back and forth about, like, what do you think about this? And I think there's a power play at hand. This isn't really about health or anything like that. And we never fell for it, not for a second. I don't recall exactly, but when people around here were scared of the so-called virus and getting caught being out and about past curfew and all that kind of stuff, because we didn't know how strict they were going to be about keeping us locked in and everything. My wife and I went over for dinner with Luis and his family. This is like the first week since they locked us up. And he was the first one I ever knew to even question whether there was even a pathogen going around. And that's a position that I joined him in taking. And now I'm really solidly on the side of terrain theory. And this has a big impact on where I am today with carnivore, because really, to sum it up, it's just I have come to really trust the power of our bodies and not believe that we're in a zero-sum game with pathogens, whether or not they exist and whether can be isolated. That's what really gets me so excited about carnivore, is that I really trust just being able to nourish your body and let it do its work. I want to list a few ways in which carnivore has benefited me. I've dropped 26 pounds in 90 days, 38 since last November. I stopped snoring, which is a huge deal when you're at friend's house or relatives and you're in the spare bedroom and you're keeping people up with your choo-choo train sounds. I couldn't sleep next to my wife for several years. I probably had sleep apnea as well, to tell you the truth, but I didn't want to get diagnosed with that for insurance reasons and all those other reasons. And I just didn't want to live with the diagnosis of something like that I thought I could resolve myself if I took accountability for it. I stopped biting my nails, which I've been doing since I was a teen, sitting in class in high school and noticing that, wow, I'm biting my nails. I still drink coffee, but I don't have the jitters that cause me to bite my nails. My gums don't bleed every time I floss my teeth or even used a water pick. My gums would bleed. Not hungry between meals, which is typical for people that are on the carnivore way of eating. And I find that there are changes in my personality. So I'm calmer and I'm more patient. I think I'm more optimistic in a way as well. And this is also huge, because one thing that got me here to this point is that I had severe chronic back pain for many years. And it went away to an extent and kind of receded, but it was always present. And it kept me from, I basically used it as a crutch for many years. So my back pain is gone. That was like the last domino to fall. And I have a steady supply of energy, and I'm just more present from moment to moment. I also have a lot of fun looking through my old clothes, being able to pick out old t-shirts that were at the bottom of my drawers, or nice dress shirts that my wife picked out for me when I first moved here and that are in my closet, and I can fit them again. It's really cool. And I'm actually probably downsizing from the size that she picked out for me. So my entire mindset is more proactive, and I've been a procrastinator all my life. And I feel like carnivore is another example of me kind of like, oh, wow, why didn't I figure this out earlier? It's taken me so long, but I wish I found it sooner, but here I am. And I certainly wasn't really procrastinating once I seized on it. Another huge change is my mindset. And a lot of carnivores probably experience this and come to this realization that it's not for everybody, but if you can enjoy eating to live versus living to eat, then carnivore might be right for you. And I'm an all or nothing person. I'm either switched on or I'm switched off. And when I'm switched off, I find excuses to continue being switched off. But carnivore leaves me with no excuses. It simplifies everything. And today is my 90-day carniversary. So I have a lot to celebrate. And I've been through a lot, actually. There's been some little kinks and bumps along the way, but it's overall, it's just fantastic. I really feel like everything's coming together right now. So essentially, I just touched on kind of taking the opposite from the mainstream and becoming a skeptic in a lot of ways. And I feel that that mindset really saved me from a lot of following along with a lot of the nonsense that happened over the last 4 years, and kind of led me to this point as well, and trusting my body. So I would say, led me to becoming a conspiracy realist in a way. We're not being told the truth about almost everything, and we could just kind of invert pretty much everything, even such seemingly minor things as the benefits of exposure to sunlight. I spent a lot of time training outdoors from the late 90s to mid 2010s. And at some point in the early 2000s, I stopped worrying about sun exposure. I stopped wearing sunscreen, and I welcomed every opportunity to be out in the sun. And I noticed, being out training 20 to 30 hours a week for triathlon and running, and even being in the open water and swimming, I noticed how good I felt when I was outdoors and active under the sun. And I even found myself describing myself to others as being solar powered And I kind of took on that identity. Like, yeah, I don't wear sunscreen. I don't need sunscreen. I enjoy getting tan. I might burn a little because I was still eating seed oils at the time, but I described myself as solar powered. And I took that, I really took that to heart and sought out exposure to the sun. And then I started questioning things like, well, then why do they tell us to put on sunscreen? And so I started to trust my biology more than what the experts told me or wanted me to believe. I've always been intuitive, and things like that only help affirm my trust in my intuition. So on the flip side, we're indoctrinated to stay out of the sun and slather on sunscreen and wear sunglasses and wear sun hats and all that. And I really enjoyed what your recent guest Bernadette said. She mentioned we outsource our thinking and our habits to various authorities, and that would include like government, academia, industry, in the media. And I think it's clear that we do that to our detriment because it keeps us on the plantation, just following the norms in everything. And that can get us into trouble. And it can also keep us from really discovering our potential. It keeps us on a narrow pathway of dependency and existence within widely ordained and accepted bounds. And it discourages so many people from going on a lifelong journey of self-discovery, thinking for themselves, and blazing their own path.
The really sad thing about that is we outsource our responsibility. We're always looking for someone to just give us the steps to do something, or the switch, the button to push to get the solution we want. And the sad thing about that is we're not just allowing people to control us. We're effectively saying to people, sure, I'll buy your products. Market the hell out of me. I don't care. Just I'll spend as much money as it needs to just be comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always taken exception to the term consumer. I found that, like, on a bigger scale, beyond sunscreen and being fed solutions and all that, like it's pretty obvious we've been lied into series after series of wars and big events that we're told in the media probably aren't what they seem to be. And if you look into, the malarkey of 2020 and beyond, it goes beyond just a pathogen or health, things like that. So it's led me really to get motivated about taking accountability for my own life, because I know that no one's coming to save us. The system for sure is not saving us, and it's only going to serve itself. One of your recent guests quoted Buckminster Fuller and said, if you want to defeat the system, you have to make a better system. So that's really where I am right now. I've stopped looking outside for saviors or solutions, and I'm looking to myself and those I can trust for a solution. So at least ways of coping, if not really coming up with solutions, but solutions that don't involve, anesthetizing ourselves, tuning out or escaping, things like that. So if I can now, I would like to go into my dietary background. It's funny that the carnivore diet can be described as an elimination diet because I've been tinkering with my diet since I was a high school athlete in my early teens. And you could say that I've tried different elimination diets and a whole series of them. At first, when I was only, I believe, 13 years old, 14 maybe, I eliminated meat. And it was in a very naive, simplistic way. I wasn't into the ethical trappings or foundations, justifications for being a vegetarian, but I was reading Runner's World, and back then, it was like, let's do the carbo loading thing. So in a very simplistic way, I just thought, I'm just going to fuel myself with simple carbs, and I avoided meat. I just eliminated the meat part of the equation, and I remained active through high school and early college, and eventually became a serious athlete later in life. And I continued on that path until 2003. So I was 36 at the time. I'm 57 now. And I just was looking into my training and the volume I was doing and how I was responding to the training. And I was just always a little bit maybe soft around the edges. I should have been really lean. My power to weight ratio should have been a little higher in terms of cycling, that sort of thing. So I finally just looked at my diet. I was like, well, I prefer not to sacrifice animals for my diet, but I think we're designed to eat meat and I'm going to give it a try. What I did when I went and I reintroduced meat to my diet, what I was really doing was kind of pushing some of that starch out. And so immediately I got leaner and my performance became better. I was a very serious triathlete at the time. And within, I think, 2 months of reintroducing meat into my diet, I hit the podium. I made the podium for the first time. I finished third overall in a race. And so that was it. And I tweaked my diet at other times. And that included even doing fruitarian. And so it wasn't that I was fixated on the meat part. And I didn't really have an overall good view of diet. I think I was just looking for another way to eliminate what I saw coming down the pike, which was all the GMO in the world. And so I knew that the main cash crops that use GMO were like potatoes, tofu. So I had to eliminate tofu. That probably helped me right off the bat. So I went on the elimination diet of just like, what can I get locally fresh? And I ended up basically just blending everything in a Vitamix because it was so boring. And I did grow some of my own vegetables on my rooftop garden in Taipei. So I've been around the block quite a few times and I've been a very serious athlete. I was training kind of like a pro, although living maybe like a surfer bum would. I was a triathlon bum in a way, and I kind of organized my life around that and freelancing. I quit my day job and I freelanced as a translator and copywriter in Taiwan and using English. So translating from Chinese to English and doing writing for various Taiwanese companies that wanted to do marketing to the outside world in English. And while I was there, I resumed being active because I came from a high school background in sports and track and cross country. And I really loved the way running felt when I was in the zone. And running really, well, endurance sports kind of got me going on this pursuit of that. Maybe it's runner's high, but it's also when you're not running, just being fit, that feeling of fitness when even an exhausting workout is energizing in a way. And it's very elusive when you're training for sports and you can find yourself just completely exhausted. You're probably running down your entire endocrine system. And a lot of times you crash, especially before a big race. You can find yourself tapering your volume just before a race and your body goes, oh, you're letting me rest. And you get sick. And that happened to me several times. So that elusive feeling of like electricity running through my body that I only got from sports previously, I'm now experiencing with this carnivore way of eating. I really took to the solitude and tranquility of running. And when I wanted to run with a friend or teammates, that was available. But the solo aspect really appealed to me. So I guess in a way, I haven't been hesitant to go my own way in that sense. And that feeds into what I'm doing these days as well. After college, I did go my own way. I moved to Taiwan, where I first got active. After a couple of years, I was living in the big city of Taipei, it was, especially at the time, it was kind of polluted and very urban environment. And on the surface, you'd look at Taipei and go, wow, how do you exercise in the city? It's really come a long way since then. It was also only 2 years from martial law. Taiwan was under martial law for 40 years. So things were really changing at that time. And there was a 6-day work week. They had to work half day on Saturday. And that basically prevented anybody from going anywhere on the weekend because they only had Sunday available. And if they're going to travel somewhere, they could only go after work on Saturday. But then they instituted a 2-day weekend, which I think that half day on Saturday is probably unheard of around the world in the late 80s. So recreation really took off. And I just happened to be like on the ground floor when that was happening. And around 1992, Taiwan had its first triathlon, I believe, and I wasn't really aware of that. I was just swimming. And I migrated from doing laps at a local pool to a swimming hole where you could swim uninterrupted for about 220 meters between one big boulder that would stick up from the water and then like a breakwater. There was a lock where a reservoir fed in. And I met some of Taiwan's pioneer triathletes there. And so I got in with these people and I saw a poster for that year's annual triathlon, and I was starting to get fit and I was starting to do some cycling with them and getting my butt kicked. And I set a goal to enter the next year's race. So that was the spring of 1998. And I signed up for that race and I got my butt kicked by my friends from the swimming hole because cycling was my weakness. And I even had to wheel my bike uphill a few times. Taiwan is super hilly, it's mountainous. But eventually, with a lot of hard work, cycling became my strength in triathlon. And I finished my first Olympic distance race in 1998. I had only done one triathlon because there was only one a year in Taiwan at the time. And the only way to enter Ironman Canada for the next year was to print out an entry form and send it in by mail. They didn't have online registration. So I was like, well, give me a year. I'll be ready for an Ironman, or maybe I won't be, but I'm going to try and see if I get in. And sure enough, I got a postcard a couple months later, like, you're in, you're accepted to Ironman Canada 1999. And I went on to complete 6 Ironman full distance races and countless shorter triathlons. And I also ran a bunch of marathons and ultra marathons, but I never really trained strictly for running performance over that time until I kind of retired from triathlon in 2013. In my first few years as a triathlete, I was a meat avoider or starchitarian, always a little soft at the edges. And 2003, I reintroduced meat to my diet. But I was always searching and I just never really found the formula. And one thing that I did notice, and this kind of plays into what I was talking about, just being energized, was I loved that the feeling when I was really fit and I would pursue that kind of elusive feeling of being on top of the world physically. But at the same time, I knew at some level that fitness does not equal health. And I also kind of told myself, because I'm really intuitive, and I knew at some level, one of these days, I'm just going to stop pursuing endurance sports, or cardio, as they say, and eventually just kind of slow down and maybe end up in qigong or tai chi, as they say. But another thing that I loved about triathlon was that it's almost impossible, if not inadvisable, to train all 3 disciplines each day. So triathlon training is about prioritizing, economizing, strengthening, and maintaining. So if you have a weakness, like I started out on the bike, really a weak cyclist, you work on your strengthening your weakness until it becomes a strength. But at the same time, you're trying to maintain in your other disciplines. And you're juggling your life commitments and you're trying to figure out your ability to recover. And it's just a really interesting puzzle. So it's a way to always maintain your engagement because you're tinkering with training schedules and training volume and load and all that. I accomplished a lot in triathlon, but like I said, I felt kind of like it was elusive trying to find that energy. I felt spent and deflated from all the years of training. Like I was on an expiry date, and I don't know how people keep it up all their lives. Like I said, I was never under the illusion that a high level of triathlon specific fitness, you get really good at swimming, biking, and running, but that doesn't mean you can, put a shelving unit together or go for a hike without really having to adapt to a different type of activity. And I made a comeback, so-called, after a couple of years off of just pursuing photography, maybe drinking a little bit. So I gained a lot of weight, but I made a comeback in 2013, had a really amazing half Ironman performance. And what I really did prove to myself was that I knew how to get fit if I just gave myself the chance. And because I had that aerobic engine, I knew how to train, I could get back in shape quickly. But I was really kind of done with multi-sports. And so I just wanted to simplify everything and kind of gain some time back in my life, listen to that jazz music that I collected so much of. And so I turned to just running only. And I did a few ultra marathons and I really enjoyed that. And I trained, in fact, with a really amazing Kiwi athlete named Ruth Croft. Shout out to Ruth. She won the Western States 100 near me in California, I think 2 years ago. So I was just cruising along. And at the age of 48, 47, almost 48, on New Year's Day, 2015, my back just went out. It was some kind of sciatica, but it started from my lower left back. And I had just gone running that morning and I felt like it was one of the greatest runs I'd ever had. It just felt fantastic. I was like romping through nature, jumping across streams, and it was just fabulous. I was on top of the world and I was aiming to schedule an attempt at breaking 3 hours for the marathon. And if I had been able to achieve that a couple of months after that back issue cropped up, I really feel that I was on track to being able to go for a sub 3 hour marathon in the early spring. And that would have been just exactly 30 years since I first went sub 3, when I was a know-nothing, just like a naive kid who thought I would always be fit. I was barely 18 years old and I broke 3 hours in the marathon when I was just on my high school track and cross country training. And so that really threw a wrench into things. And while the issue got less acute, it was always there. And I would find myself just like, I'd get up from a chair and I'd always brace because I knew that pain and that stiffness would be there. And it was always just present. It wasn't so acute, but it was there. And after I got remarried and moved to the Bay, I was never able to get back off the ground with my training. And I think, like I said, I'm kind of like an on or off person. So mentally, I just switched off. I used it as a crutch or a way to excuse my laziness. And instead of throwing myself into other pursuits, like I'd throw myself into photography, I kind of just tuned out, I think, for a little while. And I was following a pretty standard diet. And I would say my wife and I believe that we were following, a decent diet, not really snacking or eating dessert more than once a week when we had company over. And sometimes I'd even skip dessert, but we just kept gaining weight, especially me. And so I found myself talking about my former life as an athlete. And I would jokingly say, well, I was an athlete, and I might show a picture, in my favorites on my iPhone, I might show a picture of myself to somebody. And I'd say that was 50 pounds ago when I was an Ironman athlete or an ultra marathoner. And people would go, "That's really you?" And I really got tired of saying that because it was funny at first. And then, to quote the Smiths once more, that joke isn't funny anymore. It just got there to the point where I was like, I got to do something about this. Otherwise, I'm going to be like Bruce Springsteen, glory days. It's just like, I've got nothing to look forward to. And I'm just going to talk about being an active person in the past. So in order to kind of kick my own butt and really surround myself with people who were active and kind of show me the way and not make excuses, I started this project and I call it the Fit Over 50 Portrait Project. And it was just before the malarkey of 2020. And I got a lot of interest and I was in touch with a lot of potential subjects. But then the malarkey intervened. And when I ended up renting a studio space in Berkeley in 2022, I revisited that idea for the project. And then since I did have a set space for people to meet me for portraits, I thought, wait a minute, it would be really good to have a podcast to promote my work. And also, like, maybe I'll meet a CEO who's an athlete and he'll hire me to take headshots of his staff. I'm thinking in terms of marketing and that sort of thing. But my real motivation in order to, what was really to hone my chops and motivate me to just stop making excuses. So I wanted to be surrounded by people who would rub off on me. Found myself looking for solutions and saying, I'm tired of saying I used to be an athlete 50 pounds ago. And I was just motivated to really resolve my back issues. And so I started working with a chiropractor, and it's not probably a huge revelation to a lot of people, but it really resonated with me. He's like, I help you heal, you do the healing. I'm just here to facilitate that. And that's what I needed to hear at that time. So that was April of last year. And I started to take strengthening in my back and my core really to heart, and with regular visits to him to adjust me. I really made a lot of progress to the point where I was able to integrate strength training into my regimen. And that was last November. And by that time, I dropped about 12 pounds. So I was on the way, but I was still kind of missing the last piece of the puzzle. And I did try keto at one point in 2019, so pre-malarkey. And it was just kind of too complicated for me in a way. And I felt like I had too many cheats available to me. So to simplify things, I think that's one thing about carnivore that resonates with me as kind of an all or nothing kind of person. So I tried keto and it did work a number of years ago. And so that was in the back of my mind. But there was kind of that last puzzle piece remaining for me. And I did drop some weight, but I was still way heavier than where I wanted to be. And those last pieces, that last weight loss was not happening. I was making strength gains. My back was hurting less, but I was still missing something. And so carnivores really helped me accelerate everything, because it's just, I've been through some bumps in the road, but I've experienced the weight loss at the same time. I didn't lose any strength. I've actually only been back to the gym recently because I did experience some gastric blockage, I believe, that caused me some back pain. And then there was a bit of drop of energy, I think, as I became fat adapted. So only recently I feel just like that whole buzz, that it feels like I'm electrified on carnivore.
And how did you first hear about carnivore? Was it just an extension of, you knew it because you knew keto, or?
It was incremental from, so one thing I did that helped me a bit was I went to kind of OMAD, starting when I was introducing the strength training to my regimen. And that was helping a lot. I just felt lighter and I felt like my recovery is a little better. So I was kind of on that path, but it was really just this past April, late April, that back to Luis, my like-minded friend and fellow skeptic about everything, Luis and his wife hosted us at his house. He's got a getaway house in a rural area of California. We spent the weekend with him. And that was one of those days where I was just terrified, because they don't have walls in there. It's like a barn where they have this getaway house. And I was terrified of keeping everybody awake with my snoring. And apparently Luis and his wife and his two boys, they sleep pretty soundly, because they say they didn't hear me, but I suspect that I did snore like a freight train. But anyway, Luis was planting the seed, because he, at previous times when we got together, he's like, well, I'm basically carnivore, but I'll eat whatever we're eating. And I was like, carnivore, okay. And it's weird because I'm so inquisitive normally, but I didn't really ask him, because it was just so far afield to me. Like, why would you be carnivore when you could just be keto? But then it finally just fell into place. So we spent the weekend with Luis, and we pretty much followed his carnivore diet. But we added a whole lot of spices to everything, like Mexican spice. And he was telling me about the benefits, like I don't snore anymore. The energy level not being hungry between meals, that just really made the light bulb go on. And so we got home on Sunday from visiting with Luis and his family. And that Tuesday, I just started carnivore. So that was the first Tuesday of May of this year. Yeah. So that's really how I found it. And I just want to underscore that I'm the kind of person that I don't want to be dogmatic about things. I don't want my brand to be carnivore. I know that I've done a series of weekly updates about carnivore, but I think I'm ready, having hit my 90-day carniversary, to branch out. So there's other issues that I'm really interested in. Like I mentioned that I resonated with Bernadette's message the other day, not looking for outside solutions. And I think people who arrive at a skepticism of the system and what the world tries to do and pin us down. And when you think of yourself as awakened, that sort of thing, there's still a lot of traps that you can fall into. But really looking to yourself for solutions is the best way, rather than like blaming them, them with the big, like with the capital. I'm tired of that. I don't have any more time for that kind of stuff. And so I'm really all about solutions now. And carnivore has just worked out so well for me. I do have some tweaks, I think, to make, having arrived at the 90-day point where I want to reevaluate a few things. Right now, at where I've arrived is pretty much pure, just meat and salt and maybe occasionally a little bit of seasoning. And I allow myself a little bit of a cheat of cheese here and there, but I'm not snacking on things like cottage cheese. I'm no longer going out and buying raw milk, which I was doing before. When I first started on carnivore, I was having raw milk, which I'm thankful is available around here. I think I'm just really simplifying everything and I'm enjoying it. I feel so energized. I'm back at the gym right now and I'm making those strength gains again, but I do feel like my overall objective is just to be able, at the drop of the hat, to be spontaneous and to be able to just say, okay, let's go for a camping trip that involves hiking and backpacking, or let's go stand up paddleboarding, that kind of thing. I finally arrived at that point at which I've envisioned 20 some odd years ago, where I thought, well, maybe I'll end up in yoga and qigong, but I've arrived at that really overall activity phase where, and I think it's a lifelong thing. And that's what my father, bless his wisdom, and his PE teacher, they had in mind, just be able to do any kind of activity and be active, just be proactive in your life. All those years that I was training 20 or 30 hours a week and performing at a really high level in triathlon, I never had a six pack. But I look in the mirror and I'm like, whoa, I can see I'm going to get six pack abs, just from following a species appropriate diet. Just like a Rottweiler, a Rottweiler probably goes out and does its business outside, but it doesn't have to go running or it doesn't have to pump iron or anything like that. A Rottweiler is muscular and apes are muscular, just doing what they do. So at some level, I think that's what we're meant to be. If we follow species appropriate diet, we're just gonna find that homeostasis, find that balance point where we're fit, and maybe we'll even have six pack abs.
So, David, based on your experience with carnivore so far in these 3 months, if a friend came to you and said, "Look, I want to get started with carnivore," what would you recommend?
I would say carnivore is an elimination diet, first and foremost. So if you find yourself under some even loose definition of carnivore, if you're eliminating added sugars, if you're eliminating gluten, and of course, those vegetables that are out to kill you, or even eliminating and just staying on like keto style, low carb vegetables, you're already ahead of the game. If you're cutting out dessert and you're cutting out alcohol, that's another thing that I did. I had a taste for alcohol and it's gone. And I'm sure that's really helped me. My advice to somebody would be find your own level, really know yourself, what kind of person you are, your personality. Are you all or nothing like me? Or do you need to just dip your toe in the water to start? but just start with eliminating a few things that you can handle that won't make you really miss anything. Because if you're the kind of person who is like, well, I'm really missing this or that, you're going to get caught up in the what ifs. So I like this to just put all the what ifs aside and just go for it. So Carnivore is really, really working for me, and I love it. And I love the community too.
Nice. So, David, how can people reach out to you?
Well, I do have a YouTube channel. I'm on Portraits in Fitness. I have a weekly update, and I kind of hinted at it. I'm almost over doing a weekly update on my health and talking about myself. And I want to start maybe interviewing other people, and Luis would be a good candidate, and just talking about solutions. Sovereignty is really important to me, personal sovereignty, everything that really, but it comes down to accountability. So the freer you are, the more accountable you should be to yourself. So I'm on Portraits in Fitness, and I have a website, portraitsinfitness.com. You can find my podcast there. And my podcast is also the galleries of the subjects that I photograph. So we do a studio portrait and then an action portrait session and sit down for an audio podcast. So I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the various platforms at Portraits in Fitness. And that's how to find me. So I look forward to everyone's comments, and I watch everybody else's videos that I can find time to view, especially yours.
Awesome. So I'll link to all those below.
Cool.
David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, Dave.